On Central tonight, intervention from the Prime Minister as 1,400 jobs hang in the balance at Bombardier.
David Cameron will look at how contracts are handed out based on European law after the Derby-based train maker lost a £1.4 billion contract to a German firm.
But we are now looking at all the EU rules and the procurement rules to see whether we can change and make better for the future issues like this.
Good evening. The Prime Minister intervened today in the row over Bombardier and the decision to award a £1.4 billion train contract to a German firm. David Cameron says the government will investigate how European law dictates how it hands out contracts.
The announcement came on the day union leaders lobbied the Transport Secretary in a bid to get him to reverse the decision, which threatens 1,400 jobs at the Derby plant. Our political correspondent Alison Mackenzie reports.
At stake, not only the jobs in Derby and in components firms across the country, but the very future of train making in the UK. That's why the unions wanted Bombardier and the potential loss of a £1 billion plus government contract to the German firm Siemens to be top of the agenda at their meeting with Transport Secretary Philip Hammond today.
He has said at this stage that there is nothing further he can do, but he has also said that this process is not ended, that the final contracts are not going to be awarded for another few months. We're going to use that time to follow up on a number of issues.
The reality is, what's it going to be the best deal for the taxpayer? It's going to be a very expensive deal for the taxpayer, because you're not just going to put, say, in the region of 1,400 people onto the dole queues. With a supply chain, you could lose up anything between 12 and 20,000 jobs. And that means that these people who have got high skills can't produce trains. It means they're not paying tax to the economy anymore, and they're claiming social security.
The government says it has to abide by a procurement system signed up to under Labour, whereby the location of a firm bidding for a contract is irrelevant. But this promise today from the Prime Minister.
Bombardier is a great company, it's got a great future in our country, we want to see it succeed. But I have to say, in this case, the procurement process was designed and initiated by the previous government. We were bound by the criteria that they set, and therefore we have to continue with the decision that's been made according to that criteria. But we are now looking at all the EU rules and the procurement rules to see whether we can change and make better for the future issues like this.
In September, a cross-party committee of MPs will examine the procurement process, quizzing ministers and other key players.
Every train that runs in France, the plants are in France. 97% of trains that run in Germany are built in Germany. 90% of trains that run in Spain are made in Spain. And what we want is British plants in Britain for workers to get off the dole queues and use their fantastic skills to build trains.
The unions are now considering a legal challenge to the government's decision. Alison Mackenzie at Westminster for Central tonight.
And there was further criticism of the way the contract was awarded to Siemens from economic experts at Manchester University. In a report, they say governments buy goods in the same way most of us would buy electrical items. They say more thought needs to be given to the wider economic and social implications of the decisions.
It's our money that's keeping the rail system going. I think one of the questions we can ask is, why are we getting so little back in industrial policy terms? If we're subsidising the rail system so extravagantly, the train operating companies should be synchronising orders so there is at least some basic demand for the product of the Derby factory.
Well, earlier we spoke to Robert Wright, the transport correspondent for the Financial Times, and we began by asking him just why so many British train contracts had gone overseas, while German and French contracts remained very much within their countries.
This is a complicated issue. As you say, the markets in France and Germany are relatively protected, and traditionally the big state railways in those countries have tended to get trains manufactured in their own countries. But what we should focus on is that those markets are actually becoming more like the British ones. You're beginning to see the French railways getting some trains built partly in Germany. We've just seen SNCF, the French state railway, one of their affiliated companies, Eurostar, has just ordered a German high-speed train. A few years ago that would have been unthinkable. So we should bear in mind actually other countries are beginning to look at the way things work in Britain, beginning to think perhaps our trains aren't working that well.
Well, with regards to the Bombardier situation, Robert, we know union members met the minister today. Will it make any difference? Will it actually save jobs at Bombardier?
Well, I think there are two different questions there. One of them, will it make any difference to the contract? I don't think it will, because we have to bear in mind this contract was already very late in being awarded. I think going back, trying to unstitch this, facing the undoubted legal challenges, I think that's something the government simply isn't going to feel it can do, because, and I think probably it wouldn't in the end make any difference anyway. Saving jobs, there is also the question about how many of the job losses are directly because of this. There are still some contracts that Bombardier could get. I think quite a lot of people would be keen to try to get some contracts to them if they could. But I think broadly the situation isn't going to change very much, despite what everybody's saying.
Robert Wright, transport correspondent from the Financial Times, speaking to us earlier.